Hello and welcome. I'm Tafara Gadamo. Paul Mesford came to Ethiopia as a Peace Corps volunteer 60 years ago, where he spent 2 years as a teacher along with his wife. In 2008, I met him at his Washington, D.C. home, adorned by souvenirs he collected from across the country. In the course of the 2-hour conversation, I came to realize he had a lot to say, and it was interesting to know that Ethiopia, as he asserts, had defined his career. As you'll hear, he could at times also be a lot more Ethiopian. Here is a summary of the conversation I filmed and interrupted by questions.
I was 22 years old in 1964, attending CCNY, City College of New York. Kennedy had just been assassinated, and we were very upset. And Sergeant Shriver, his brother-in-law, and then the head of the Peace Corps, came to our university and gave a speech about ask not what your country can do for you, and the kinds of things that we could do for our country besides go to war, besides be in the military. So my wife Ellen and I signed up that day. The places that we had wanted to go were filled or not available. However, there were some positions in Ethiopia. So we quickly ran to the map to find out where Ethiopia was. Knew very little about Ethiopia. For all of us, the thing we knew about Ethiopia was Haile Selassie during World War II, going before the League of Nations. We all knew about that. And set off to Los Angeles for training. We learned a smattering of Amharic from Wolf Laszlo, who you may know is one of the great Amharic language scholars at Los Angeles, December 1964. And then flew off to Madrid first, when we boarded a Ethiopian Airmangid 707, and we flew to Addis Ababa. Went to the Entebbe Hotel, from the airport to the Entebbe Hotel. And we underwent for several days, weeks, I don't remember now, a local indoctrination. And it was there that I learned that, in spite of the fact that I had learned Amharic at the university on the way over, I was going to be sent to Adwa, which is in Tigray province. And of course, there they speak Tigrinya. So Amharic wasn't as much help. So I had to learn, struggle with a new language almost from the beginning. Before we departed, however, a real big event occurred, which was the visit of Queen Elizabeth and her husband Philip. They came out of the airport with a Rolls-Royce, a maroon Rolls-Royce with the Queen and Haile Selassie. And so right off the bat, I got to meet Haile Selassie. And in those days, you were French, they pushed you to the front of the line. And then off I flew to Adwa. Well, first to Asmara, because the way to get there was to fly again on the 707 on its way out of the country, which stopped in Asmara in those days. There I had to put together couches and chairs and literally a household for my new bride and myself for our new place, which we knew nothing about. We were just told, here it is on the map, Adwa. And it's quite some distance from Asmara, but they would put us on a bus there. And so all our possessions were put on the bus, on the top of the bus. And we, in the Mercado in Asmara, and we drove for 8 hours, starting early in the morning. There's an escarpment that you have to go off. And you go back and forth on these very narrow roads with this bus, and you're hopeful that the bus driver knows what he's doing, because sometimes you can't see the road as you look out the window. It was packed. This was when people would travel, and when they would visit, they would bring chickens and goats and sheep to, the way we bring candy and wine. And we came into the middle of Adwa at about noon, maybe later, maybe 2 o'clock. Dusty and sweaty from the heat of the day and the confined quarters of that bus. They took our things off the top of the bus, and the bus drove away. And I'll never forget that feeling. My wife and I standing in the middle of this town square in Ottawa, and the bus driving away with this cloud of dust. And we ended up finding a place to live. We had a tall wall with broken bottles on the top to keep people out. And at night, you could hear the jib all night long. The howling of the hyenas was up there was like unbelievable. We were advised to hire a zabanya. You had to hire a guard. The deal we made with our landlord is he would fix us a Ferengi toilet. And he did this by putting a barrel on top of the roof. We could get electricity in those days from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Well, it was kind of like electricity. Otto Georgius was also the local electrical company. He had a Ford engine that he had put up in a building just inside town that ran a generator. And it ran street lights in Ottawa, and in some of the better homes, there was a wire lead, and he would charge you by the light bulb. Ottawa is surrounded by these mountains, individual hills that come to a point, which meant that I couldn't get radio signals very well. So although we had brought a shortwave radio, we only could get, depending on the atmosphere and when it was, we could get news from the West very, very rarely. There were 6 phone lines to Ottawa, and they were all in the post office in the middle of a field. And to make a long-distance phone call, you had to call from Ottawa to Asmara, from Asmara to Addis, and then from Addis you could make a long-distance phone call. The line was always broken up, and the fees were expensive. We were only given, I think it was 75 ethi a month to live on, each of us. So it was 150 ethi a month was our pay. They thought that was all we needed at that time to live in a place like Ottawa. When you went to Addis, you got a little extra for your housing. And indeed, it was more than enough. And I learned also that we were messing with the economy. We were generous with the woman that was bringing the water, and I think it was I think it was something like we paid her 5 ethi a month, and I felt guilty for that. I thought that was a little bit. But then I was told by some of the elders in the town, you can't be paying that kind of money to people because then they expect it from us too. The only way we could get our food was to go into the market on Saturday. There was no market otherwise. And I learned the tricks of the market. I learned that the way to really test a goat was to feel its backbone and see if there's any meat on it. I learned to pick the right kind of chickens that were not going to be too tough because they've been all running around. And I would come home every day on my horse with a week's worth of chickens and a goat to be butchered that day. It took us a while to do that. At first, the idea of killing your own food really upset us. We could go up to Asmara once a month, maybe, by bus. It was a big trip for us. And we could take in supplies like powdered milk, cereal, wheat. But I remember Asmara as a wonderful city. I mean, it was truly an Italian transplant in the middle of Africa. Beautiful boulevards with wonderful stately palm trees up and down the boulevard, with cafes, all in the Deco style. Restaurants there were wonderful. You could get, and they had a combination of Habesha and Italian. We had a chance while we were there to visit Massawa, and it was a seaman's town with all these ships coming in from the Red Sea. It was a scene out of Raiders of the Lost Ark for an American. But it also got me a sense of Ethiopia's participation over the years in Red Sea trade. You know, we in the West thought we discovered Ethiopia in the 19th century. But of course, Ethiopia had never been lost. It had always been part of the Red Sea trade, going back to the Bible. Of course, living like that and seeing it like that was almost like being back in the Bible days. People wore the clothing of that time. They dressed for the climate as they always had. They experienced the climate like they always had. And this sense of trade and commerce that Massawa represented was really made an impression on me in terms of what I was experiencing, what Ethiopia had always been about. Back in Adwa, we learned that we were close to Aksum. And so I was able to take my horse and ride over the hills into Aksum. And I got there on Fasika, Easter, which is like the big holiday. And all the priests from all over came with their robes and their umbrellas, banging their drums and jingling their cymbals, and these men with these long horns, each one plays his own note, doo, doo, and the masenko and the kraal, all the traditional Ethiopian instruments, and all the color and light in front of the Ark of the Covenant. In those days, people in the West didn't take as seriously as many are now taking that perhaps the Ark is there. And we sat there in front of the obelisks and wondered at the obelisks that were there at Aksum, that had been carefully made to look as if they were stones piled on top of each other, but they were not. They were carved from a solid stone. The school in Adwa was broken down into several buildings. One was a concrete block building that had recently been built with windows that you could crank the windows open and closed, but there was no glass inside the panels. So it had modern windows, but no glass. Behind were two old buildings, one of which had been a YMCA, and that was the elementary school. So you had the elementary school out back, and you had the high school out front, and the high school looked like a modern school. The classes in the elementary school were much larger. Each class had lots and lots of students, and they learned by rote. So all day long you could hear from behind the children as they A, B, C, and they all said it together. In the high school it was different. There were regular classes, regular schools. It was very much like high school. The students varied in age. There were some older ones and younger ones. They came from villages. In those days, we had no doctors. We used to call them dressers, people that had some medical training, first aid training, essentially, that could wrap a wound or something like that. Water was brought in from the mountain. It was a Peace Corps project, an earlier Peace Corps project. They piped in they built a dam around a little creek, and they brought in water to the middle of the town. And you could get the water there, or you could get it by the river. I learned in reverse, and this was perhaps for me the hardest lesson to learn, is that when you go over and you see all these customs, for an American they seem odd. The women there had their hands red with henna, which made them look nice. And I said, well, why do they do that with their hands? Isn't that messy? And one of my students said, but sir, your women put it on their lips. Isn't that dirty? Yuck. And I said, isn't that right? We see the other side sees things so differently. And it was then that my eyes started to open to how we get into cultural truths, the way that we see the world in our own culture through eyes that are focused by our own cultures. We lasted a full semester in Adwa, but that closing the room every night and that darkness every night, I came out after the first semester and said, "You've got to get me out of here." I'm going bonkers in locking my doors at night. And they said, "Well, you're a city person. Maybe we should bring you into the city." And so I was brought from Adwa to Addis Ababa, where I began teaching English at Haile Selassie, the first university. And students were brought in from all over. And in a way it really gave me in Adwa, I learned about the Tigray. When I went to the university, I learned about all of Ethiopia. I learned about the Oromo, the Guragi. I learned about the Anuak even, and all the different people and the different cultures of Ethiopia. Because here I was meeting the best of Ethiopia's youth. These were the people who would soon make Peace Corps teachers unnecessary. I was able to get an Ethiopian driver's license, and I would drive supplies to my fellow Peace Corps volunteers on the weekend. So I got to see all the different towns of Ethiopia. So I drove and was able to see Gondar and all the great sites at Gondar. Got up to Lake Tana. I got down to Hosanna and to places in the south, and got to see Jima and Banga. When I went into the Peace Corps, I was told I was there for 3 reasons. One, I was there to show Ethiopians how average Americans were, and get them to know us as real people. And I was to observe and learn them and come back and tell Americans how Ethiopians were. It was supposed to be a two-way street. And then in the course of this, I was supposed to try to make a contribution to Ethiopia, to their education. I saw the students there as, I was one teacher teaching all those students. And one day these students would be teaching. It was going to multiply. And indeed, I think to that extent, it's been a success. I think the education levels have, over the years now really impressed themselves. I look back on it now from where I sit, and I know that there are many more teachers now. I know that the world is much more accessible from Ethiopia than it was when I was there. And when I came back from Ethiopia, I had a much harder time adjusting than I did when I went there, because now I could see so many of our customs and attitudes were just part of our culture and not the truth and not the real way it was, but just the way we chose to see it, the way we learned to see it. And my neighbors and my friends in America didn't understand that what they thought was the truth and the real way was nothing more than just the culture. I'm involved in government affairs, international affairs for KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. I've been with them for over 30 years. And part of my involvement was made possible because I could see both cultures. And I had learned to see the different cultures, and it helped me to explain the Dutch to the Americans, and it helped me explain the Americans to the Dutch. And so my career really was built on my Peace Corps experience, where I learned these differences in culture, where you see things one way when you're living in a culture, and you see it in an entirely different way. My dream had always been that I would go back to Ethiopia. And for me, Ethiopia is Eritrea, Tigray, and Showa. And the idea of going to Showa and to Tigray and not going to Asmara doesn't feel good. There's something. I had always hoped that I would be able to rent a car, because I always went by bus from Asmara to Adwa. And I dreamed of being able to get into a car and drive my own car, stop along the way where I wanted to, and drive into Adwa from Asmara. Exactly. have some tej, maybe a little suwa. And in those days, Malati beer was also very good.